First of all, I think it is important for us to understand that the ICC is not set up only to return convictions. It is about accountability, and I cannot stress this strongly enough. What happened was, before you started having institutions like the ICC, and before the ICC, you had the ad hoc tribunals for the former Yugoslavia, for Rwanda, for Sierra Leone, and so forth. There were temporary tribunals meant to shut down after a while, but the ICC was meant to be permanent. Before the advent of this idea in the late in the 1990s, you had a scenario where people thought they could do whatever they wanted with human beings that are supposed to be their subjects. So if you're in a national jurisdiction and you're a citizen, good luck to you if your leader decides is a tyrant who would not brook any dissent or dissensions from the population. They could do whatever they wanted, and nobody dared ask them a question. There was no place where that kind of question could be asked. Now, this is a critical and a hugely important development in the current scenario, where you have the ICC that could always ask that question at the right moment. Unlike before, when that question could not be asked, now that question can be asked, and that is a hugely important development. It is what I call loosening the grip of tyranny on the lot of humanity. It means that those in power who feel they could get away with it now have to worry that maybe not, maybe they can't always get away with it, as was the case before. That is important. Now, the value of accountability is not in conviction, it is in doing justice and asking people questions that you didn't ask before. Accountability is to ask people to give account of their conduct. You could not do that before. Now, people could be asked to come to court. Now, you mentioned the case of Kenyatta, the case of Ruto. The cases are not over, by the way. I think I should stress that. The cases run into difficulty with the evidence in the case, but the cases were withdrawn, not permanently. Those cases could come back again in future. A future prosecutor could decide, now we have evidence, we're more confident about going to court. Those cases could come back at the ICC. But what's more important for now is the image that all of you would have been familiar with, the image of President Kenyatta coming to the ICC to sit in the courtroom to answer questions. At least he wasn't put on trial then. At least he showed up in court because the judges said, we want you to come to The Hague, to the courtroom. And there was questions in his country, some people telling you don't go, you wouldn't go. He came to the ICC and sat in the courtroom when this case was being discussed. And in the Ruto case, the vice president of Kenya, he was in court whenever the court wanted him to come there and sit there and answer questions about his conduct through his lawyers. So those scenarios were unimaginable at a time in the past. Now, they're no longer imaginable. It would be wrong to take that kind of development for granted. Mr. Babu, you talked about, was in court at the ICC all through his trial. That was something that was inconceivable, not at a time too distant in the past. So if you think about those, you see value, enduring value in the ICC. So they are there to give account of their conduct. That is accountability. Let's not only say, well, the only time we can recognize that the ICC serves a value is when everyone is, that is before the ICC is convicted. That is not the measure of justice. The measure of justice is that ability to ask people questions and then they give account. If their account makes sense, the judges will make their judgment. If it doesn't make sense, again, the judges will render their judgment. And I cannot again emphasize that aspect importantly enough. One of my heroes in this work of international law is Mr. Robert A. Jackson, who was the American representative in Nuremberg, the chief Nuremberg prosecutor, who once said this, that the world yields no respect for a court that is constructed only to convict. There is no respect for the world to such a court, and that's important for us all to keep in mind.
Yeah. And so this brings us also to talking about impact, and maybe first again, sort of personal. All of these cases, all of these prosecutions that have happened in the past, but also will happen in the future, they have an impact on the ground. These are people, as you also explained, they have their supporters and they have their people that are against them. So how do you deal with the fact that whatever you're judging, and you're trained as a judge to apply the law, but whatever you are judging, whatever you are doing, whatever you are saying, you are thereby becoming part of a conflict, even though you know, as a judge are supposed to stay out of it, but that's not possible with the types of cases that the ICC is doing. How do you deal with that? So for instance, that you then as a judge in the Gbagbo case became part of the Ivorian conflict, whatever you decided was going to impact Ivory Coast.
That is not a peculiar predicament for ICC judges. It is there everywhere. That is one of the occupational hazards of being a judge. You're there. You describe it in terms of being now part of the conflict. Of course, you are part of the conflict the same way as a referee in the football field is part of the football game going on. You're in there, everybody's seeing you, you're making that call. If you give people a red card or a yellow card, God forbid, a red card to a team member, you're hated. There are some places in the world where you do that, you get lynched as a referee, but thank God that doesn't happen everywhere. So you're hated for calls you make and all that. But then you ask yourself, you cannot cry, oh, poor me, see what I do. You get bullied in the media. You get trolled. I was trolled horribly and all that stuff. Comments, newspaper journalists writing, some of them don't understand, what the full story behind it, and then they take it from somewhere in the right. But you can't, whine about that. If you can't take the heat, then you're in the wrong profession. So, and that's not, again, unusual. One of the big cases of old that have defined the work of judges is a case called the Queen versus Wilkes. W-I-L-K-E-S from the UK many years ago. I think it was 1750, 60 something. That was a case involving Lord Mansfield that popularized the quote, fiat justitia ruat celum, that is, let justice be done though the heavens fall. That was a case where, again, back in those days, in the mid-18th century, he did a case that was considered political, and he was bullied mercilessly in the public media. So poor Lord Mansfield has to say, fiat justitia ruat celum, I must do justice though the heavens fall. So it is a problem of old for all judges, so we just have to get on with it and do what must be done.
Well, talking about what must be done is what you're trying to do at the ICC is have an impact on these conflicts and post-conflict societies. And with that, I want to move to our second theme, and also the second movie that we're going to see and we're going to talk about more about this sort of impact and the ability of the ICC to have that impact. And we're first going to watch a clip from another movie, part of the Camera Justitia program here at Movies That Matter Festival, and that is Quo Vadis AIDA, and it's about the Srebrenica genocide where 8,000 Bosnian Muslim men and boys were killed. And this story, this movie, is told through the eyes of a Bosnian UN interpreter, based largely on the real life story of Hasan Nuhanovic. So let's watch this clip.
Their tanks are getting closer and closer by the hour.
We are doing everything we can. Aircraft are on standby and ready to launch an attack on all positions held by the Republika Srpska army.
What will happen if the planes don't come?
They will come. They will come.
Ljudi, baza je puna. Niko više ne može ući u bazu.
Srebrenica is a safe area under protection of the United Nations.
Kao čovek, kao general, garantujem sigurnost za svakog nevinog.
Do you have your family here?
2 sons. Do you think we are safe here? The Serbs are inside the base fully armed.
What? Get uniform.
Mi smo civili.
Pa s kim ratujemo 4 godine, jebem vam, majku vam jebem. Sve civili.
Preživjeli 3,5 godine rata, preživjet ćemo i ovo.
Ja ako ostane glud umrijeću, ja moram bježati odavde.
Vesme, možeš mu povesti moje sinove iz baze?
AIDA ubiće i Srbija koji nađu. Ubiće i mene. Samo bez panike i propustite malu djecu i žene. Škarci, nadam vam.
Hajde, odmah!
Ljudi idu tamo gdje je bezbije.
They are killing people outside.
Dogovor je bio.
I don't know where my family is. Svidio moje. Tarik, svidio moje. What will happen to us?
Quo Vadis AIDA is an incredibly powerful movie, and it brings really very close to the audience the pain and the fear that was so tangible. It's highly been praised for its impact also, and nominated for an Oscar for Best Foreign Movie. The impact also on contributing to the commemoration of the events, fighting against genocide denial, is a very important aspect in many, many conflicts, but also in this, and potentially also contributing to the healing of victims. What do you think the impact is of international law itself in that respect? Do you think it can contribute to transitional justice beyond the establishment of guilt and innocence, such as history writing, restoration, reconciliation, remembrance, recovering also from national traumas, but also personal traumas?
Again, that's a massively important movie right there. It has no doubt to be one of the classics in this genre of movies and stories. It's not about fiction. This is telling you, something that actually happens, and it's actually telling that story in a way that brings it to the average viewer. It is a movie that I must strongly recommend to everyone to watch. But that story, that movie, it's symbolic of the story of the dystopian circumstances of the human condition that you see there. You see it there, you see the same story in Rwanda, in the Rwandan genocide. You see the same story in what happened in Sierra Leone, in the Sierra Leone Civil War, and many, many stories like that. Again, it's important to tell these stories, and they do without, I mean, I see you asked me a question about the different things that international criminal law can do. And it is a very important question, but we need not pile on too much on the shoulder of international criminal law and international criminal justice. It is enough to recognize the calling for accountability that movies like this tell us. And as I say, they symbolize events that have happened in many other places. It tells you the story of that thing I call the grip of tyranny on circumstances of humanity, where human beings feel that, or felt, hopefully until now, before the establishment of the ICC and other justice mechanisms, that they could do whatever they wanted with their fellow human beings and no one would ask them questions. That was the old dispensation. Right now, we see value in saying, okay, this is the sort of thing that happens to human beings. Now, from now on, we're resolved. We no longer go back to the empty phrases of never again. Remember, this happened too in the Holocaust. The same stories happened. And we are saying in this day and age, when we hope people don't do this sort of thing, but when they do, the world will say, sorry, we have to ask questions about what happened here. Who are responsible for these things? They need to answer for their action. If countries don't want to do that, don't want to ask those questions of accountability within their national realms, then there is a place on the international plane where those questions of accountability must be asked. This is important. Now, in the telling of that story, in the asking of that question and the giving of the answer, the record of the events would be created for purposes of establishing for future generations this transcript of, or the record again of those stories, so that they are not so readily denied. That will be a byproduct of the main frame of the work, the main frame of the work always being, let's train it on the accountability of human beings who do these sort of awful things to one another.
So you say that the value lies more in the creation of a historic archive than a historic narrative or historic truth-telling as such.
It is the truth-telling in the sense that you're not leaving it to people's imaginations of what happened. You are holding people accountable, but in that process of accountability, witnesses will come and tell their story, hopefully sooner than later, before witnesses die or before evidence degrades to the point that could no longer be used meaningfully. But in the meantime, while those evidence or pieces of evidence are viable, could be, records, transcripts of events, pieces of documentary evidence and other such kinds of evidence, testimonies, you have them recorded in one place. That is the transcript or the records of an international criminal tribunal, be the ICC or some other mechanism like the Rwandan tribunal, Yugoslavia tribunal. So that has an important purpose. Again, when I say byproduct, again, the main point is not a commission of inquiry that creates records. The idea is to hold people accountable. But of course, in the process of doing that, we capture the story as well. It's recorded in the archives of international justice.
But a very difficult thing I always feel that with prosecuting in a criminal trial is that what a prosecution has to do is limit the history it's telling to the actual cases that it chooses to prosecute. And those choices also very much rely on what actually can be proven. And because evidence for these armed conflicts that are often quite some time ago is so hard, you see that it's often very limited. And also the essence of criminal law is to limit the story, the history's telling, to those particular events for which you have evidence of those particular suspects that you're going to try in a particular case. Whilst what a historian would do would be actually to increase the context, to try and invite all the context and the actual root causes of a conflict. So the criminal trial limits that because it needs to select all sorts of aspects, context out in order to come to an actual tangible trial. So that isn't that inherently problematic when people have the expectations of the ICC in criminal trials as bringing that truth telling to what you as a judge are actually able to do?
And that's why, yes and no. And that's, first of all, that's why I say the main purpose of the international criminal justice system is not what I call a commission of inquiry about what happened here. Usually you would have had a commission of inquiry. For instance, in the former Yugoslavia, in Rwanda, there were commissions of inquiry that went in there, asked questions and get a preliminary evidence. So that was a commission of inquiry. But then on the basis of that, the international community felt, well, we have to do more than just commission of inquiry. And then they created the International Criminal Tribunal for the former Yugoslavia. Did the same thing for Rwanda. But in a case, the reason I say that there's a byproduct of these events, trials, the byproduct of, in terms of creating the record of what happened, is in the sense that when you are telling, for instance, the story of crimes against humanity that happened, now there is a premise to that. The premise is in definition of what is a crime against humanity. It is defined as a widespread or systematic attack against the civilian population, as part of which the accused person did certain things, or part of that widespread or systematic attack against the civilian population. So in convicting someone for crimes against humanity, you have necessarily to tell the story, the background story of widespread or systematic attack against a civilian population. It is in telling that story that you bring in draw the wider arch of the story, telling that why did this happen, who were involved in all that. But that's not the end of it. So you must paint that story of widespread or systematic attack. But then on top of that, you must craft in what it is that the accused person or the defendant is alleged to have happened. In some instances, it could be that the story of the defendant's conduct is already part of the widespread or systematic attack against the civilian population. But then in any event, you still need to tell the story that it is beyond just the unique actions of the defendant that the court is looking at. The law needs also to capture the broader events that the conduct of the defendant forms part of. So yes, in that sense, you can create, and often you do, create a record of the events beyond the limited, the narrow, silo of the defendant's own conduct in the case.
Yeah. So it's the ICC is very important also in relation to other institutions that can contribute to achieving the same goal, and
Absolutely.
it also can do quite a lot more than only prosecuting individuals. If I can summarize,
as long as the focus is always on inquiring into guilt or innocence, and it's important to stress the importance of that focus because of the standard of proof beyond reasonable doubt. It is not enough to tell the story of what happened. It is not even enough to tell an intelligent story of the theory of the case that implicates the accused persons in the conduct. For you to convict anyone of a crime under the Rome Statute, the Rome Statute itself, lawyers forgive me for mentioning Article 66 of the Rome Statute, specifically requires that no one may be convicted unless the guilt is established beyond reasonable doubt. This is important. If I dwell a little on that, in that provision, there are three things that happen, that requirement. First of all, the accused person is presumed innocent, basically presumptively innocent of the charge against them. Now, that's the first thing. The second thing is that the burden of displacing that presumption of innocence, it's on the prosecutor, and always on the prosecutor. Because the person is presumed innocent, they're not required to prove their own innocence because it is already presumed. So that's the second thing, burden on the prosecutor. And then the third thing is that what level, what standard of proof is required to displace that presumption of innocence. It is standard of proof beyond reasonable doubt. This is critical in the work of the court. And oftentimes when the court acquits, people are, there's a lot of protest going on. How could that be? But the reports of this person committing atrocities, no. There's some stories that make sense about his conduct. No, that's not enough. For you to convict, you have to prove beyond reasonable doubt. In the definition of it is this in different countries. In UK, for instance, it is defined in terms of the trier of fact or the judge must be satisfied that he or she is sure. You must be satisfied that you are sure of guilt. In Canada, again, it is said you must be sure of the guilt. In Canada, it's even an elaboration to the extent of saying that the idea of proof beyond reasonable doubt is actually closer to absolute certainty of guilt than it is to probability or likelihood of guilt. So if you, as a judge, feel that the accused person is probably or likely guilty on the evidence, that is not enough to convict. You must acquit the accused person. In the US, proof beyond reasonable doubt is defined in terms of firm conviction of guilt. These are not easy burdens to judge. And that's why when judges apply those standards, those understanding of the law and say, sorry, we are not satisfied on the evidence that this is the case, there's protest, but that is justice.
Yeah, no, and this shows how difficult it is to have criminal trials with this high thresholds of evidence. The audience is sending in questions, so thank you very much for doing that and keep on sending them. And two questions that I am going to ask to you together is, first of all, how do you view the fact that the ICC's primary focus so far has been in terms of prosecution has been on African countries? And we all know also from watching this movie, Quo Vadis AIDA, that African countries aren't the only places in the world where mass atrocities are taking place. And another viewer wrote, when you were elected president of the court, many African countries were highly critical of the ICC and even discussing withdrawing from the ICC. That is no longer the case, while some have withdrawn. Is this change something that you helped bring about? Can you tell us a little bit on your views on this African critique and how that has been in the last couple of years?
Thank you very much. Again, important questions. Those of you who've heard me speak to this, we know where I stand on the critique that focuses on Africa. It is an argument that I've never been impressed with at all. It is, of course, important to say that the work of justice of the ICC has to be seen, to be felt everywhere around the world. You're correct in pointing out what happened in the former Yugoslavia, was not in Africa. And we now know that the ICC is also looking into cases in Afghanistan, cases in Myanmar and other places. But yes, before that, there was a time when all the cases of the ICC were from the African continent, but it was because justice cried out to be done in all those instances where the ICC was doing its work. I was not impressed by the argument that, well, ICC should not inquire into what happened in Africa until the ICC is in a position to uniformly do the same thing at the same time all over the world. It had to start somewhere. And the African victims, by the way, of those atrocities were never complaining. So ICC, go away, why are you giving us all the benefit of your existence? They never complained. So who
were the ones that were complaining, Judge? Who were the ones that were complaining?
Well, that's the question. That's what we must ask ourselves, who were the ones that were complaining about this thing. But the point is this, and in my engagement, eventually I'll come to that later, I've always been, again, clear about that. Yes, I do believe that ICC must do its work wherever the needs of justice are called for, be it Afghanistan, Palestine, Israel, or Myanmar, wherever the question rises, the ICC needs to do its job undeterred. But in engaging with that, so my argument has always been that has to be the argument, that what Martin Luther King said, right? The threat of injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. So ICC, do your work. And I said African leaders were entitled to make that argument robustly and firmly. But what was not on, in my view, was to say, well, ICC, go away, don't do anything in Africa until we see you've done cases everywhere else. No, that doesn't work for me. But that's part of the engagement that was needed. It was a deliberate effort on my part to engage with African leaders in that regard, to try to help them understand better what the ICC was about. There was a lot of misinformation. For instance, one of the arguments that was made at the time was that the provision in the Rome Statute to say that no one enjoyed immunity before the ICC, we call it Article 27 of the Rome Statute. Part of the misinformation about ICC say that, well, that was a trick that was put in that provision by Western powers to make sure that ICC is used to go after African leaders. Well, when I took on that project of hopefully better informing about what the African ICC was doing, I had to inform everyone that, look, the idea of no one enjoying immunity before international criminal law was something that started in 1919 at the Paris Peace Conference. The idea was to bring justice after the First World War. And the purpose was to try and prosecute the Kaiser of Germany, the Emperor of Prussia. And it didn't work then, but that was when the idea of no one enjoying immunity, that's when it began. It had nothing to do with African leaders in 1919. And also in 1945, we had Nuremberg. Again, the Nuremberg had that powerful provision in Article 7 of the Nuremberg Charter to say no one, even heads of state, may enjoy immunity. I mentioned to you Robert H. Jackson, who led that effort effectively. He reported to his president, Truman, at the time, in June 1945, on the work of setting up the Nuremberg process. He reported back and focused on that immunity question in his report to Truman, and saying that in London, this became an issue, but he insisted that there cannot be immunity for even people highly placed in government, including heads of state. And this quote I like very much, which he put in his report to Truman. He said, "We do not accept the paradox that responsibility lies the least where power is the greatest." That was in 1945. There were no African leaders on the scene at the time. It was all about the Nazis and fascists in Europe, what they did. So I had to, in dealing with engaging with African leaders, dealing with this question of is ICC only about Africa, I had to engage those sorts of misconceptions, some myths about the work of the ICC as well. So eventually, yes, due to a concerted effort, we didn't, the anti-ICC rhetoric that we saw from the Africa region subsided significantly. It was not an accident. It was a lot of work that was done to, explain the ICC better.
Has it helped in that respect that both you and the prosecutor at that time, Fatou Bensouda, are both from the African continent? Has that had an effect?
Of course, yes, indeed, it is. There are some things. I mean, first of all, there's a matter of trust about it, right? If I had to engage the origins of the anti-immunity provisions of Rome Statute, there was a certain level of trust to it. Okay, EboeOsuji would not be lying to us about this. He's an expert in this field, and he's telling us this. So we have to. I remember one instance where in a meeting boardroom of a certain Minister of Foreign Affairs, where I was engaged in explaining these things, and somebody at some point, but no one told it does this all along. So well, now I'm telling you that. So that's part of it. So people who will listen to you because they share certain things with you, and it's easier to do that than you're talking to someone and they're politely listening to you, but they're not really listening to you. They're waiting for you to finish and go away so they can go and do what they normally would do. So yes, indeed, it helped. The fact that I'm from Nigeria, it helped a lot. And by the way, Nigeria did play quite a bit. I did rope in the government of Nigeria in trying to, again, help to stress the importance of the ICC. And I was lucky that they saw the point and, in fact, became, at some point, a big champions of the ICC.
Definitely. That was also, I always go to the Assembly of States parties every year, and that was quite visible how Nigeria was also there, trying to engage in these African politics, trying to turn the tide to a more constructive approach around the ICC. I want to move the conversation more personal, if you allow me. And also, there's been another really great question from the audience on for you personally. He or she says, the most horrible cruelties and severe human suffering is subject to the attention of the ICC judges. How are you able to deal with that?
Sorry, what was the question again? Sorry.
How are you able to deal with the fact that you're judging the most horrible cruelties and severe human suffering? Because that is the subject matter of the ICC. How are you as a person able to say, to know I am the judge, I am the one that actually has to rule over this? And also, with what we talked about before, sometimes you need to acquit people. And of course that is, because of that standard of evidence, but these are really horrible situations. Like, how do you go home?
It is certainly that I think also one thing, the question that might also be getting at would be, it's easy for, when we hear this sort of stories, if you don't have to do anything about it, you may have the freedom to, switch off the television broadcast that may be broadcasting documentary about this, or you don't have to listen to it if it becomes too much for you, for the average person. But for the judge, you don't have that option. You must listen to the story, you must look at the evidence. And yes, it can have an effect on the human being. But the way I look at that is that this is not at all something that a judge should complain about if one considered that story of cruelty actually happened to a human being. If that story actually happened to a human being and that human being either died in it, or if they're lucky, relatively speaking, so to speak, they may be maimed for life physically or mentally, but they experience directly the cruelty, they and their family. If that could happen to them, you as a judge who signed up for this cannot have the option of saying, oh, poor me, I have to listen to this story. No, it is your job. Deal with it and find ways of coping so that you can keep on retaining your objectivity to the story. But we don't have the luxury of crying for us. We have to be made to watch this thing we do get paid relatively well compared to those who died in these experiences. So we can't complain about that.
Mm. Thank you very much for that. During the Movies That Matter Festival, you've eagerly seen very many of the movies, and you've also, in our preparation to the conversation and our emailing and talks, it shows that you think about movies, you think about art, and also what it tries to display, how it tries to display the violence, the conflicts. Before we move, so I want to ask you whether and how sources outside of the law, such as art, such as film, literature, how that affects, but also supports your legal work. And I'll let you think about that for a minute or two, while we're going to watch one of those examples, one of those movies that you shouted out as a warm recommendation, and I immediately jumped on the festival site and watched Eimofe. Eimofe is a movie set in Nigeria, and and you've chosen to discuss this movie. So let's watch the trailer.
Two of you want to go to Italy. Do you have papers?
Yes. What's going on?
The way we live this world, it's very important. Very, very important. If you are burying someone, it's good to show people that they were loved, that the lives they lived mattered.
It's tofu. You don't like it? No. How can you not like it? It's so good.
It's okay. Leave me! Don't do that. Leave me! Don't do that.
Judge, can you tell us about this beautiful movie, Eimofe? What did it do to you?
It is a very, very powerful movie. Apparently, I understand that the director also basically, this is the first movie that made. It's exceptionally well done, well acted, not overdone at all. But what's more important, the cinematography is great. Again, I'll recommend it for the viewing. But the theme it captures, it's something that we have not sufficiently explored in international law. The UN is doing something about it, the Sustainable Development Goals of the United Nations, and that intends to, the purpose of which is to tackle poverty. And that's one story of that. When you watch that, that is a story of really soul-crushing poverty, that the population of the world is 7 billion, I think 7 billion. We can readily say that at least 1 billion of humanity is subjected to that level of poverty. Nigeria has about 200 million people. Now, I don't want to exaggerate, but I can, from cup side, guesstimate, I could readily say at least 1/4 of that population, that is their story, right? You go to India, you see the same thing. Tanzania, wherever you go, human beings who are caught in a trap of extreme, excruciating poverty. In the meantime, there are those who are also living it up. In Nigeria, for instance, the kind of, I don't know where they set that scene, but there's a place in Nigeria called Morocco, I think it's a slum that's near a very upscale neighborhood called Victoria Island, Lagos. Victoria Island is where the rich and the wealthy, one of the places where they live. And this is right next door to where you're in those high-rise, huge, beautiful apartments in Victoria Island, and you look down on the other side, you see this grinding poverty that is Morocco, where teeming populations live. Now, this story tells you about these two protagonists in it who want to escape to Italy, one to Spain, the other one to the man to Spain, the woman wants to escape to Italy. Again, that tells us a lot, doesn't it? Stories of Lampedusa, people, drowning on the Atlantic Ocean, you begin to see why. When you're left with that kind of life, and you at some point you're right, is it more dignified to die in that sort of scenario, in that sort of condition, or do you take your chances? If you died on the Mediterranean crossing, so be it, but at least there's a chance you may make it and get out of what you are suffering from back home. You see that in immigration, the migration crisis you have in Europe, in North America, in Australia, and other places, this grinding poverty to drive this. Now, the interesting thing, of course, is that in those sorts of places, right, you also have extreme wealth of the wealthy people siphoning up the national wealth, and in foreign bank accounts you have. Brings you to the question, does international law have a role in all of this? We need to explore that question. A long time ago, I wrote a piece sort of entitled Kleptocracy. Is that level or the same level of crimes against humanity? You have to ask yourself a question. If you have a country that could very well afford Medicare for its people, if people didn't steal the money and send them overseas, but then there are people who do that, billions of their own national wealth sent overseas that could be used at home to help very poor people. And those poor people die of preventable diseases in large numbers. Highways turn into road, death traps because the roads are not maintained. And you ask yourself, all right, you would total the number of people who die from those preventable causes, compare them to the number of people who die from the sort of violence that result from post-election violence and things like that. You begin to get your answer about whether international criminal law has a role to play. But then it's up to the states parties. I remember when I was the president of the ICC, I went to Ecuador, and the president of Ecuador, Lenin Moreno at the time, was keen to stress that the ICC should also take up cases of corruption, corruption of the kinds we're talking about here. And when I invited President Buhari to come give a speech at the 20th anniversary of the Rome Statute here in The Hague, again, he made a point of that, saying, look, again, the African Union made him the champion of anti-corruption movement. And he said that it was his obligation to raise that question, that the ICC has to consider taking up these kinds of cases. And each time I told them, well, you are the leaders of states, it's up to you to move to amend the Rome Statute to give the ICC that jurisdiction. In the meantime, it doesn't have it. So you give the jurisdiction to the ICC, I'm sure the judges and the prosecutor will do their job. But the point is that movies like this begin to tell us a lot about the uses of international law beyond the obvious ones that we see now.
Mm-hmm. So you have just departed the ICC as its president. Is this theme, poverty, the crime of kleptocracy, maybe as a crime against humanity, I think I hear you say, sort of maybe adopting the widespread or systematic and the intent? Is this something that could be your next step in your career? Because you're very young still. There's many years for you to still have a great impact on international law and international criminal law.
Well, thank you for the compliment about being that young. Well, I'm getting up there, so, but what I do know is I've been returning to I used to teach briefly in academia before joining here again. I'll be returning to university in Toronto, Ryerson University, Faculty of Law. be joining them and helping to train future generations of international lawyers. Maybe this will be, of course, something of interest to them. But in the meantime, I will remain, of course, focused on how international law could be used to its optimum potential, and we're not even beginning to tap that potential yet. How could international law be used to better the protection of human dignity around the world? Is something I'm committed to, that I will continue to do as long as I'm able to.
Well, I'm very happy to hear that. And hopefully we'll see a lot of your impact in the future as well. And when we talk about future generations, there's also a few questions on the Q&A I think from people aspiring to be a judge. So one question, how can one become a judge at the International Criminal Court? And someone else asking, do you have any tips for a law student pursuing a career in international law?
The tip I give to them, a general one, is that you have a focus on what you want to do with your life, and then what to prepare for it. Get your all your degrees lined up, and you cannot have too many of them. Begin with your bachelor's degree and your master's degree. Generally in international organizations in the legal work, the general rule is you have to have a Master of Laws degree. Not just JD, but it has to be LLM. And so those are minimums now. And your PhD, if you can get those, they all help. Do internships in international institutions. Keep working at it. I liken life to, you are a pilot in the jumbo jet of your life, traveling from point A to point B. Along the way, there will be turbulence. You can encounter turbulence, bad weather, and you can, drop altitude and all that. But as long as in the general direction you're headed in where you want to go, and keep doing other things if what you're hoping to do doesn't materialize immediately, take up other things that may be relevant to where you want to go. And you wouldn't know when these things start clicking. I did not start live hoping to be a judge of an international criminal court, not at all.
What did you think you were going to be?
I just wanted to be a lawyer. I was a barrister in Nigeria and in Canada, practicing law and things.
What happened? What happened?
You have to concentrate on doing the best job you can while at it. And that's what I was trying to do in Toronto, trying to represent my clients to the best of my ability. And then a sudden phone call arrived at some point, and then things took their turn from there. And also when I was at the ICTR, and again, I wasn't planning to be a judge until one evening, one of the judges there came to me and said, look, I think you might want to think about this. So again, these are how things happen. But just whatever you're doing, while you're doing it, do the very, very best that you can in it. When you do that, things have a way of somebody saying, okay, maybe it's time for you to do something else.
Well, thank you so much for all the passion that you're bringing also, because I think that really shines from you. And also I really appreciate, and maybe that's something that you would add also as a tip, like I really appreciate how much I mentioned it before also, you watch a lot of these movies, these movies that matter. I always love the title of this festival. To influence you, is that something that just influences you as a person, or is that also what you would want to recommend to other lawyers to do?
Well, there are certainly there are movies that, the movies that matter. That's a very important segment in the movie genre. Movies that matter, not just ones that we enjoy and go home, but ones that ask us questions about why are we here? How can we make a difference in our own lives as human beings and in the lives of others? And there's a number of offerings in this year's festival about it. For instance, we looked at Quo Vadis AIDA, it was a powerful one. Another very powerful one that I watched was a movie called The Dissident. It has its story of the killing of the Saudi journalist Jamal Khashoggi. Right, it basically the Rome Statute has this crime of enforced disappearance that took its bearing from what happened in Latin America during the Dirty Wars in the 1960s, 70s, and 80s. The story of Los Desaparecidos is something everyone hears about. But then you think that these are happening in the Benin Republic of Latin America. You can only hear about them. And this one in October 2020, this happens in broad daylight of international consciousness. Someone disappears in a consulate, and that's it. They disappeared. And so that was the story. The Dissident was a very, very powerful one as well in there. Another movie I watched earlier on, I don't think it was part of this year's event, The Great Hack. Again, tells us the story of the new technology, what it means in our lives, thought-provoking in the sense of, all right, how you can have information manipulators working behind the scenes to manipulate populations, whole populations. If you stop to think about that, you think about what happened during the Nazi era. Technology was invented, radio, television, supposed to be something that gave joy to the masses. You could watch, Edith Piaf, Billie Holiday sing beautiful songs on TV or the radio. But then along came someone who said, okay, now we're going to use this thing to mobilize hatred against a population. And then propaganda was deployed using such media to describe Jews as rats that people, you cringe when you think about them. If you go to the Auschwitz Holocaust Museum, there are some footages of the television programs that people were watching in Germany at the time. Hordes of rats streaming out some drain pipes, and then people somehow were made to think about Jews when you watch this imagery. You could not see the awfulness of it. Now we're in an age where you don't need radio to build your own radio station or your own television station to engage in propaganda. All you need is a cheap smartphone, and then you get on Facebook or Twitter or Instagram, as the case may be, then you can use that to manipulate a whole population into hatred. Now, of course, when Facebook was created, it was seen as this thing that will bring people together, families and friends, and in a network happily. Now people are finding ways to manipulate that into instruments of hate and that sort of thing. So that is a new frontier that we all must be worrying about. So there's a number of movies that ask us these questions about Quo Vadis to ourselves. Where are we going? Lives and consciousness of beings. So you have that. Yes, so is that dystopian condition of human condition that it talks about. I think I think of humanity that there's more dystopia in the human condition than utopia in it. You rarely see utopia, but it just takes a little thing and then you start seeing that dystopia all over the place. And as long as that is the case, that underscores the importance of institutions such as the one we have, the ICC, where I used to serve. They're supposed to be there to ask questions that must be asked when these rogue behaviors occur.
Yeah, no, I fully agree. And thank you so much for this Quo Vadis to watch list. The Dissident is on my to-do list now because you've sold it to me. I can't wait. And I also am a warm supporter of the Great Hack. I currently teach a course, Artificial Intelligence, and I've assigned this as required reading, watching for all of the students, as well as the social dilemma, because I fully agree with you of how important it is that we understand what we are already currently facing and what is there for us. What are we waiting for? What's going to happen in the future? And I think that's a really nice bridge also to mention that tonight there will be the Camera Justitia evening where all of the movies, where there will be also the choosing of the winner of the Camera Justitia Award, for which 9 movies were nominated. And I had the pleasure of being a member of the jury for that. So I got to watch all of them. And tonight, the movie that is going to be shown is The President. And that is about the Zimbabwean election. And here you see that even without algorithms, you see the rigging of an election and how that occurs, and also how then the trying to get justice for that. A very impressive, again, moving movie that I hope everyone will watch. So hopefully join us tonight for the Camera Justitia night. And Judge Chile Eboe-Osuji, this was a wonderful pleasure. Thank you so very much for this conversation. You are an inspiration, and no doubt that you will remain an inspiration and impactful in the future. And thank you also for your years as an important president of the International Criminal Court. So thank you very much for this conversation.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Marieke. You too, Karin. Thank you.
And we are going to end this by watching a trailer of the 9 Camera Justitia movies, and hope to see you tonight at Camera Justitia night. Thank you for your attention. Thank you for your questions. Goodbye.
Me dijiste cómo lo hacemos, no, pues entre todos.
Écoute, comme ça. You see how unjust this system is, so you just have to fight against it.
Sería para escupir en la tumba de Franco.
Crois-moi, ce n'est pas un jeu.
Эта система наша становится худше и худше. தான் எங்களோட எல்லாரும் மறைக்கப்படாம வெளியில வரணுமே.